Welcome to the Mosaic podcast. We're so happy to have you here. The Mosaic Society is all about celebrating the intersections of our identity, whether it's through culture, spirituality, or civics. We're three friends exploring these paths together. I'm T. Marie, your cultural mosaic.
I'm Roseberry, the voice of the spiritual mosaic.
And I'm Shreya, bringing in the civic mosaic. Our mission is to strengthen friendships through exploring each other's passions and to inspire confidence for you to show up as your true self in your communities.
We'll be sharing new insights, ideas, and conversations each week with fresh posts every Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday. And of course, this podcast on Sundays. So let's dive in and explore the many intersections of identity together. Hello, everyone. That was so fake. Hi, guys. We're the Mosaic Society. Welcome back. We're in New York right now. We planned a little trip out to see Shreya. We'll see each other, but we're at Shreya's place. But today is our first themed week for Mosaic Society. This week we are talking about colorism. For my post this week, I essentially wrote like a letter from the perspective of a dark-skinned Black woman and the experiences that we go through in society, specifically American society.
So for my article, I'm looking at colorism through the lens of Spike Lee's 1988 film School Days.
So I looked at the legacy of colonialism and understanding how colorism has impacted India. I had the most fun researching how exactly colorism has manifested itself, from makeup, skincare, movies, even worship. So yeah, it was interesting.
Sorry, technical difficulties, but I don't remember where I left off, but essentially I just feel like as a Black community, we've really settled in the rights that we've been given so far. And I think that if you put it in perspective, being enslaved and then Jim Crow for another another 150 to 60, no, not 50 to 60, like another 100 years basically of Jim Crow, because the civil rights was 1965 and then 1960, literally like another 100 years of Jim Crow. And then the civil rights movement, it's been what, like 60 years now since the civil rights movement. In perspective, we have come so far. We're not enslaved anymore. There's no segregation anymore. Like, we are free to do what we want. But that doesn't mean that we're still held to the same respect and standards that others have. And because we've gotten so lazy in regards to that, in regards to fighting for our rights, I think that's why when you do hear dark-skinned Black women speaking about colorism and speaking about their experiences with colorism, it's faced with such, oh, you're being ungrateful. Or like, the community's fine, like, don't create more divides in the community, or you're good as you are. Like, I understand where those comments are coming from. I just think those are very naive comments to give based off of the experiences that are still happening today. But like, I think the first thing I think of is like with Black women when they have daughters, like the way that we pass on, like, oh, your hair needs to be professional. Like, oh, don't wear that style, don't do this. Like, just keep it down, keep it straight, put it in a ponytail, whatever. Like, I think that's the biggest thing when it comes to like the experience of dark skinned kids. The internalized, I was gonna say misogyny, that's wrong. The internalized colorism, the internalized oppression that we take on. Yeah. So parents definitely shape it, but I think that goes into another aspect. It's not necessarily about the colorism itself. It's about the way that parents process trauma and the way they pass it on to their kids. So it happens. It depends on your family. But yeah. Did I answer your question? Yes, T, you have something.
I would like to add to what you said about how we don't move the same way people moved during like civil rights. We got very comfortable in the rights that we earned. I think we as a community in some ways don't stand on business anymore. The Montgomery bus boycott, they stood on business. They affected the money. And that's how change happened. The consumer power that we as a Black community have is so powerful. And there have been so many different companies who will, their highest people, whether it's the CEO or just people that are very high in the organization, will communicate that Black people aren't the audience and we don't really make things for Black people, but we still spend our money there. Balenciaga is one type place, but it's very into our culture. It's very much so in the pop culture, but they are communicating to us that they're not for us, but we still spend our money there. And within my family, like as we hear about certain things where, oh, they are against our rights or they advocate against our rights, we tend to cut that place out if possible. We got very comfortable with the rights that we have, but we still have more that we need to fight for. Like it's not over. We're still facing certain things. The attitude just needs to be different. Now, I do think that there's like an aspect where it's like we're sick and tired of being sick and tired. You know what I mean? It's tiring, you know what I mean, to constantly feel like you're fighting to live in a country where it's like we didn't ask to be here. We were brought here, okay? But it's like the system was never made for us. So that can be very draining. It can be very exhausting.
I agree with everything that you said. There was one part where you said sick and tired of being sick and tired. Speaking to that, it kind of talks about what I was saying of like how we process trauma, like how parents process trauma. I feel like with the introduction of social media and the introduction of the internet, honestly, like you can get any information anywhere. I feel like it's also a matter of like just being so oversaturated with information and so oversaturated with information to the point where you have to fact check everything. I think we don't know how to research anymore. We don't know how to educate ourselves anymore. We don't know how to have dialogue within communities, both with people we disagree with and people we agree with. I think because of the fact that social media, the internet has made it so easy for us to have this information, it made it so easy for people to put out whatever narrative they want. It's made it more difficult for us to just stand on business. I agree we need to. I think that I just think my theory is that the reason why we've become more and more stagnant is because of the fact that it's not necessarily that we're just fighting for what we believe in anymore. Now it's also that we have to fight for the right information to get to the point where we stand up for what we believe in, if that makes sense. So I feel like maybe if we could, this is another conversation, but regulation on social media or something, like the way that we put information out there just oversaturates people and then we don't know how to stand on business. Um, but yeah, I want to say that because I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired too, but it's also like there's just so much information out there. And I'm grateful for the fact that like the three of us, we do our research, we look into things and we enjoy that. But for people who don't enjoy that but still want to stand on business, how do we get them to that point? How do we help them figure out what information works and what doesn't? Add on to that point about consumerism, I think it's important for me to bring up the impact, influence, actions of the Black immigrant community. I think this is not fully thought out. I'm sorry. It's just something you started talking. I was like, no, like seriously. When you said your family, you'll cut out certain like organizations or things that have said like they don't support your rights, right? I feel like with the Black immigrant community, it's a little bit different because most of the Black immigrant community were at the point where we're still trying to just establish surviving. Like we're not a lot of Black immigrant communities, it's not a thriving community. Not that we're struggling, but I think it's just immigrant culture as a whole. You're just always surviving. You're always putting yourself in a situation where it's like, I need to make sure I'm okay. I need to make sure I can provide for myself, for my kids, for my family. I need to make sure that everyone back home is good and everyone here is good. And so there's this barrier, I think, within the Black community when it comes to Black immigrants and then African Americans, where it's like we're affected on the outside because we both look the same, we're both Black, but on the inside within the communities, we have different struggles. Black immigrants, they're fighting for their rights as Black people and as immigrants. They're fighting for their ability to provide for their family because they're seen as less than because oh they don't speak proper or they have an accent or they don't have a certain degree from this certain school because they're from Senegal or they're from the Congo or they're from Benin. Like there's a different type of struggle that the Black immigrant community has. And I used to get kind of like not frustrated, but I felt like the Black immigrant community kind of ignored or pushed away the African American community, specifically when it came to like rights. I'm talking about rights only in this category, but specifically when it came to the rights and the struggles that we all have as Black people, I got upset because I felt like Black immigrants were just pushing that away. But then as I grew up and I got into college and I started seeing all the experiences and like I talked about it yesterday, like being a first generation American, like and a first generation college student, there's just a different struggle there. There's a different sense of reality that is happening for Black immigrant communities. And I still don't know how to bring to light to the Black immigrant community these rights that we are losing and these rights that we need to fight for without dismissing the fact that they're in a different reality altogether. Like, I don't know if I'm articulating that well, but I'm basically just trying to say Black immigrants have have multiple struggles they have to deal with that a lot of African Americans don't. Not that African American struggles are less than Black immigrants. Everyone's struggle is unique to their own. Everyone's trauma is unique to their own. I think systemically speaking, Black immigrants just tend to struggle a bit more systemically, socially, academically. It's just the system's not created for Black people, let alone Black immigrants. So I just wanted to add that in because when you said about your family, I was like, that's really nice to hear. Not that my family, it's just we have different struggles, Black immigrants. Where that's why I told you guys I consider myself Senegalese American, not African American. Because I know African American is a culture in and of itself, and I don't relate or identify with that culture because I didn't grow up in that culture. I still don't get it. Maybe my kids will, but I don't. So I just wanted to add that in because you were talking the consumerism aspect, you were right. Like you're completely right. So that's the other conversation, African American versus African, which would be a whole other topic. But yeah, so many layers, so many layers.
Okay. Slightly controversial. I have this question about empathy within the Black community for darker skinned women. So I think there are three parts to this. Is it a matter of don't divide the community right now? There are bigger issues that we need to focus on. Not now. Is it a not now issue? Is it a why you're dividing the community on something that doesn't exist? So more of an empathy issue, more of a I don't understand the problem issue because they don't experience it themselves, or they don't experience the level of it, or they don't understand the nature of the layers of discrimination that a darker skinned Black woman goes through. Or is it I get it, I see it, I just don't want to talk about it right now, I'm done, I'm tired? Which is it?
You might not like this answer, but it's all of the above and more. There are so many reasons for it, which I also think is why it's kind of difficult to or it's been difficult to have that conversation. Colorism, in the simplest terms, I think, colorism is just racism within one race. That's essentially what it is. And so, like, if someone asks me, "Oh, why are white people racist towards black people? Why are Hispanic people racist towards Asian people?" Like, whatever. Like, if someone asks me that, there's so many reasons. There's a million different reasons. History plays a part of it, historically speaking. Like, if you go back to the slavery days, like the house slave versus the field slave. The house slave was lighter skinned, the field slave were dark skinned. Like history plays a role in it, trauma plays a role in it. The way that we process trauma, some people are avoidant, some people are very direct and want to deal with it, some people get angry. Like there's no answer. There's multiple things. But at the end of the day, two things are true. One, we have to solve the problem. We have to stop making dark skinned black women feel less beautiful. We have to stop making light skinned honestly, and also on the other side, light skinned black women, they have this beauty standard put on them. On one end, dark skinned they're okay, quote unquote, they're quote unquote more beautiful than dark skinned black women. But on the other hand, they're not as beautiful as white women, quote unquote. So it's like light skinned black women are also put in this like weird middle space where their beauty is subjective based off of the room that they're in. So that can create its own dynamic internally with them. So we just need to fix it. We need to have the conversations. We need to research. We need to find ways to say, okay, this is your experience. And even though I don't know that experience because I haven't had it, I understand what you're saying. Let's figure out steps A through Z to get to a point where we're all feeling better about the way that we present ourselves and the beauty that we hold. The second thing that is true is we've been ignoring it for so long. We have intentionally ignored colorism. That's not something I'm going to be like, oh, I don't know. No, we have intentionally ignored colorism for years. Part of it is because of the fact that what we talked about earlier of like the black community settling a lot after like the civil rights movement and then like Obama being president, we settled. But another part of it is the black community, we feel safe within each other. Feel safe being around other black people. So when you're in an environment that you already feel safe in, and then you're like, oh yeah, well within this community, there's colorism, there's divide, and you're making that once comfortable, safe environment unsafe, it causes an issue. So people tend to ignore it. Traumatically speaking, like psychologically, emotionally, mentally speaking. So like we've intentionally ignored it so that we can stay comfortable in the one community that we feel safe in. I get it. We feel safe in this one community more so than other communities. But we're going to have to make ourselves a little bit more uncomfortable if we want our community to thrive in the way that we keep talking about. And we want our community to thrive in the way of the people of the past who have worked so hard to get us to where we are now. They didn't get us to this point just so we can ignore the problems that we still have. They got us to this point so we can teach ourselves how to communicate about those problems and find solutions that work best for everyone. That's what they worked hard for. So I don't know if you like, it's not if you like that answer or not, but like it's not a direct answer. There's so many reasons for it. There's so many people who do it. I'm not even going to talk about white people at this point. Like just within the black community, light skin, dark skin, medium skin tone people, like it's everyone for different reasons. We just don't know why because we haven't talked about it or communicated it enough to do that, if that makes sense.
Okay. No, no, no. It's all that I didn't like the answer. I expected it to be a mixture of everything anyway, but I just wanted to know your perspective. Yeah, because it's not the same experience at all. Absolutely not the same experience, not the same context whatsoever. But there are different reasons why colorism exists in India as well. And there's no one source to point your finger and say, this is why it's happening. So I expected it to be a multitude of reasons and ways in which it is manifested and why exactly there's a reluctance or pushback against people who do speak out against colorism. So thank you. Not disappointed. Thank you. So following on from that, or maybe shifting a little from there, I was really curious about what you guys said about your individual blog posts. You mentioned about hair textures and how it doesn't meet the Eurocentric standard. And even within the community, the idea is that, even within the Black community, the idea is that straighter hair is more professional. My question is a little bit about protective hairstyles. I was just really curious to ask both of you whether there's a difference in the way the Black community and then the larger society, the American society, US society, perceives one, protective hairstyles for men and women, and what are the beauty standards when it comes to darker skinned black men versus darker skinned black women. You did mention in your Rose's post mentions that darker skinned black women are not given the same respect, recognition, and dignity that lighter skinned black women are. I wonder if the same exists for men. So that's the question to Rose. And to you, Tia, I wanted to know, is there a difference in the rules or in the standards that are set for men and women when it comes to their hair, particularly protective hairstyles? How is it perceived?
Yeah, so in society, protective hairstyles for both men and women typically aren't perceived as professional, or they have a very negative connotation. And there's had to be legislation, like the Crown Act, that has had to pass because people would discriminate based off of hairstyles and say, oh, could you change your hair because it kind of goes against like what we see as professional. And so there has been legislation that has passed that kind of forbids that. For men, for black men who have hairstyles like braids, whether it's cornrows or locks or a different protective hairstyle, there's been this perception throughout time that they look like thugs or gangsters, which is a really harmful stereotype. And for women, it's seen as just unprofessional, maybe ghetto, quote unquote. But then you'll see other groups of people who will do those hairstyles, and the perception will change a little bit, which is unfair. So society really isn't as accepting to protective hairstyles overall. And these hairstyles are a part of so many different other cultures. They've been around for centuries, but yeah, in America, a lot of times there is like this pushback and negative outlook on it from society.
I agree with everything T said. I think, well, first I'm going to start off by saying this is just like my initial thoughts because I haven't fully really thought about the dark skin male experience versus woman. I think it's because I don't know. I think, well, let me explain my thoughts and then explain why I haven't really thought too much about it. I don't think that there's dark-skinned black men that are held to the same beauty standards as women, at least not in the same way. Eurocentric beauty ideals for men often focus less on physical appearance and more on their like attributes like their character, their status, their social influence. And so for men, beauty standards tend to be more about how they present themselves, how they move through the world, how they assert their confidence and their power, more so than the look itself, whether they're being articulate or if they're really successful in their career, or even if they're just fitting the idea of what quote unquote manhood is. That's their beauty standard. And so there's definitely an element of physical appearance that affects men, but it's often tied to the other strengths, like, or the other characteristics, like someone's strength or their charisma, more so than just the beauty itself on the outside. That said, they do experience some differences and challenges when it comes to colorism. I think that what impacts them a lot is more so of the, like, they're stigmatized in the sense of like the stereotypes of them being less approachable, if that makes sense. They're less approachable. They might look a little bit less refined compared to a lighter skinned man. And so I think beauty standards, like not beauty standards, but just standards like that, Eurocentric standards like that, apply to dark skinned men a lot more for the characteristics. In some ways, they do have less of a space to be vulnerable and talk about these things. So I also think that's why I haven't really thought too much about the dark skinned black man experience because I haven't heard a lot about the dark skinned black man experience. I'm one of six girls. I don't have any brothers. My cousin, he's not dark skinned, he's brown. Like he's lighter than us. My other cousins, they're light skinned. Like the men that I grew up around were all light skinned, and so I never really heard the experience of a dark skinned black man. My dad's dark skinned, but he's also an immigrant and he's also very calm. He doesn't, those types of things don't really bother him. So like we haven't really had those types of conversations. But yeah, I would love to hear more about it. I just don't think I've been exposed to it enough. And then even with research when it comes to colorism, I feel like it always ends up going back to beauty standards with dark skinned women. Because when it comes down to gender, beauty is seen as more important for women, and then intellect and the way that you carry yourself is seen as more important for men, if that makes sense, that generalization of the two.
Okay, thank you. So I was actually really curious about both these aspects, one about hair and the other about beauty standards. About hair, if I get this correctly, you mentioned that in general, there is a lack of acceptability because of preconceived notions and prejudice of quote unquote thug or ghetto. I guess that's how it's perceived. So, no, just a follow on, or just to make sure I'm getting this correctly, after that particular legislation was passed, I think you said it was the Crown, right? Crown Act, the Crown Act. So after that particular legislation was passed, how long has it been since that has been passed?
California first passed it in 2019. It wasn't passed federally until 2022.
Okay, so it's a really recent law, and that's surprising, but okay, a really, really recent law. But at least they passed it, so that's something. So my general perception is that, and I've come to understand this, that the male and the female experience is different with similarities. It's usually different because the challenges that they face perhaps are also layered in different ways. So I was just wondering how it was perceived because a man has the traditional male attributes that they have to abide by, they have to be strong and masculine, things like that. Contrasting those values, core values, with the way masculinity and strength is exhibited according to Eurocentric standards versus within the Black community and how they I don't know how the interplay of these different factors would be really interesting to look at. I don't know if I'm articulating that properly. I just feel that there are layers to it. I'm a woman, so I can relate to a woman. I can't completely understand the experience of a black woman, but I can, when you guys are telling me this, I can understand the layers that go into it. But for a man, it seems completely alien to me. I don't understand. I would like to know more about it. beauty standards. Okay, Rose, the thing that you said about beauty standards, I really like what you said because as a foreigner, not an immigrant, as a foreigner, when I look at I cut this out if it's inappropriate, okay. I've always felt that the black man's when you look at it in media, like in movies, I feel the darker skinned black man is always, when given screen space, is always considered to be a black man, as in they don't have to live up to a Eurocentric standard in that way. But women do. And yeah, so I was just curious whether the same standards apply or not when it comes to perception of who's handsome, who's charismatic, who's beautiful. Yeah. Anyway, that's it. I'll shut up now.
Question for Rose. So, you mentioned a lot about the disrespect that dark skinned black women face from black men. I'd like to hear your thoughts on how other black women can sometimes either contribute to the disrespect and also how we can help uplift dark skinned black women. One phrase that I've heard said within and outside of the community is, "You're pretty for a dark skinned girl." So, how can we work to combat some of our own internalized colorism?
So this is a really important question. And when you sent it to me, I was like, there's too many layers to this. So I did write it down. So I'm probably just going to read this off. If it sounds a little red, it is because I want to make sure that I'm not answering this question to belittle other Black women who aren't dark skinned, who contribute to it. I just want to speak in as honest a way as I can. All right. So first, there's the issue of internalized misogyny and unrealistic beauty standards. Colorism isn't just about skin tone, it's deeply connected to misogyny and the rigid beauty standards that have been forced onto Black women for generations. We've been conditioned to believe that femininity, desirability, and even worth are tied to how closely we align with Eurocentric ideals. So when a dark-skinned woman finally gains some level of validation, whether through lighter skin, looser curls, or more acceptable features, she might internalize those beauty standards and even distance herself from the struggles she once faced. It's a defense mechanism, but it also keeps the cycle of colorism going. Second, for many, conforming to mainstream beauty standards isn't about vanity, it's about survival, honestly. Historically speaking, light skinned women have had better access to jobs, social mobility, and even protection. So some women, after experiencing years of rejection, might feel like upholding these standards is their way of securing a place in society that has always pushed them to the margin. It's not necessarily about intentionally looking down on others, it's about protecting themselves from the same discrimination they once faced. Another layer to it is power and oppression cycles. So when you've been beaten down and oppressed for so long, finally gaining some power, any power from wherever you get it, can feel intoxicating at times. So sometimes instead of using that power to challenge the system, people embrace it over others. It's the classic hurt people hurt people. I don't really like that phrase, but I feel like that's the best way to describe this layer to it or this dynamic to it. After years of being dismissed or ridiculed, some Black women might see an opportunity to align themselves with the very beauty standards that once excluded them. They think, well, now that I'm on the other side, I don't want to go back. Again, a defense mechanism, survival. So they cling to the validation and sometimes look down on those who don't fit the mold. And then there's also, well, I guess lastly, there's the scarcity mindset and unnecessary competition. Society has made Black women feel like there's only room for a select few of us to be considered beautiful, desirable, and worthy. And specifically Hollywood, when we're talking about movies, TV shows, who we hire, scarcity when it comes to Black women and who is considered beauty is really high. It's high scarcity. Yeah, it's high scarcity over there. This creates this unhealthy competition where some women feel like they have to tear others down to maintain their own standing. Instead of challenging the system, they reinforce it, thinking that if they don't, they might lose the small amount of validation they fought so hard for. So overall, it's not as simple as saying like some Black women are colorist after experiencing colorism. It's more about understanding how these systems of oppression work and how people respond to trauma, and how sometimes when you've been denied something for so long, you're afraid to let it go once you finally have it. But I do think that the real power comes when we recognize these cycles and actively work to dismantle them rather than repeating them or ignoring them. That's why conversations like this that we have in this podcast are really important, because at the end of the day, none of us should feel like our beauty or our worth or our identity is something we have to fight for because it's something that's already our own. It's something we already represent that makes us who we are. So it's not something that we should prove is worthy. We shouldn't have to sit here and prove that, yes, I am beautiful. Yes, I am strong. Yes, I am this, that, and the third. We're already here. None of us should have to feel that way. None of us should have to feel this trauma based off of how we look. But historically speaking, we're already here. So that's my answer for you. I had to write it down because, again, I'm not going to break down any more Black women. There's no need for that. It's just a matter of highlighting the struggles we already face, where we're at now, and then how we can move forward. So, yeah. Does that answer your question? She gave me a thumbs up. Okay. So, last question. I got a question for you, Shreya. There was a lot of good information in there. It was really interesting to see colorism outside of just Black people in the Black community. So you've traced colorism in India back to caste and colonial influences, both of which have led to intergenerational conditioning. So which legacy do you think is the bigger obstacle in modern Indian society and why? Also, what realistic steps can families take to challenge colorisms from within and foster more inclusive attitudes? So on one end of the question is, do you feel that with colorism, caste or colonial influences, or wait, do you feel that caste or colonization has been a bigger influence on colorism and the way that it's perceived in India today? And then the other question is, how has the intergenerational trauma and conditioning been affected within families, and how can they start to challenge colorism within their own home?
Okay, mm, I'm all, I find that question really interesting because it talks about two major issues that are going on in India. One major issue that's definitely going on in India, that is caste, and the other which talks about the colonial hangover. I definitely do not think colorism is the biggest problem in India. And to place colorism on the same pedestal or the same level as caste is doing a disservice to all those people who are affected by caste. So yeah, that's it. Second, this is my opinion, and you will find mm, 1,000 or more intellectuals and academicians who disagree with me. But this is my opinion, and it's probably an unpopular one. So yeah, when it comes to caste and colorism and colonialism and colorism, I think colonialism, as well as the influence of all the invaders who became Indian rulers in some way or form, played a role in how the Indian society perceived people who were darker skinned. Ancient India did not show that sort of perception. Caste existed even then. But at that point, color was seen as attractive. Darker skinned was considered attractive. So it was more of the sense where when we had people who were coming from Turkey and Iran and basically from the Middle East and from up north, when they became the rulers and they were fair skinned, am I frozen? Okay. Should I continue? From where should I start again? Okay. So when you had, for example, let's say the Mughals. Okay, they come from the Timurid clan. So they're not, while generations of them started intermarrying with other Indian rulers and their children, so they became Indian. They were white, they were fair skinned or traditionally fair skinned. So the idea was that the ruler, for at least 500 years in most parts of North India, were fairer skinned than than the farmer, let's say, or the person who's doing field work. So the idea was the person with power and influence was fair skinned. So that started changing the way they saw people in positions of power. They changed the way they saw how men and women who were in positions of respect and who had, let's say, access to services that would make them look attractive. Simply put. So it can be traced back to 500 years, 600 years ago in India. Colonialism just cemented it with official policy and with biases where the white man became the master, and in the mind, everybody was colonized to think that, "Oh, I have to be like them to be considered attractive." Also, I think the general idea was that when you look at someone who has blue eyes and who's fair skinned and has yellow hair, you get a little startled, I guess, when you've only seen black hair and brown eyes for a very long time. So there's this sort of awe that came in where people with fairer skin tones were considered beautiful, and only they were considered beautiful. There was a sense of disgust that came with people who were darker skinned, and this was very internalized. So, caste in itself didn't have anything to do with color, but with these influences, caste became something that was the skin color became indicative of. So when the colonizers came in, they actually tried to classify races. They thought all these castes were races for some reason. So went to each community, measured their hair, the texture of their hair, the size of their nose, the bridge of their nose, the skin tone, their height, their build, and they said that okay, these are martial races. These are pretty races, flushed ivory, they're pink, they're fair, and these are dark skinned. So mostly those who belong to the tribal regions or down south, they were called, and I quote, I think it is dead black. So this is the range that they created that we prescribe to through them. It wasn't something that was inherently there. In a large way, emphasized and created this new standard. So people were already being extremely discriminatory towards people who were to communities, lower caste communities or Dalits. You add the fact that you're describing them as, let's say, dead black. You're associating that particular skin color with a lower caste that is already discriminated. So you're cementing an existing prejudice and you're adding a layer to it. So that's how it mixed together. It's not that one was already existing and the other was there. There was caste prejudice and discrimination. Then there was colorism. The British just came and synced both together, making it more of a caste thing, right? It wasn't necessarily something that was seen together. It wasn't necessary before the British, perhaps it wasn't seen that you're dark skinned, so you're probably lower caste, or you're lower caste, you're probably dark skinned. No, it wasn't that way. That inference perhaps wasn't always that natural. With their influence, I guess it became, oh, you're dark skinned, so you're probably lower caste. Or you're lower caste, you're probably dark skinned and dirty or whatever. That's my opinion. It's unpopular. It needs more nuance. I'm not able to give all that nuance here, but I see it as two distinct things that one influenced the other, and now it's just this ugly beast. End line is it's discrimination.
That was really interesting. I actually, the idea of policy coming in and solidifying social standards that were already kind of there. That's interesting. Thank you for joining us for part 2 of our Colorism podcast. If you weren't able to listen to part 1, just hop over to the Spotify and then look for Colorism part 1. That's the title. And then also on the YouTube, just look at the podcast previous to this one and it'll say Colorism part 1. And in that one we talked about our description of the articles that we wrote for colorism. We also touched on a lot when it came to like the foundations of colorism and our perspectives and thoughts when it came to it. So just hop on over to that and you'll see more about a conversation with colorism. But for now, we will leave you here. Bye.
Bye. Thanks for tuning in to the Mosaic podcast.
Don't forget to follow us on YouTube, Instagram, and Spotify to stay updated on new posts and episodes. Also, tune in to our blog where T. Marie posts every Monday, Roseberry every Wednesday, and I, Shreya, every Thursday.
We're grateful you're here, and we look forward to embracing the intersections of identity together in the episodes to come. Until next time.
Stay curious.
Stay true.
And stay unapologetically you. Bye.